All right, so in this discussion, I'm going to go over some basic aspects of sustainability. This is a huge, huge topic, so this is necessarily just a quick overview, but it should give you a pretty solid foundation for some key concepts in sustainability and like what it means and some of the applications of it. So we'll go over what it means to be sustainable, how do we define it, how can we use resources sustainably, and then what are the three E's, so-called, of sustainability. So I'm sure you've heard the term say sustainability or green thrown around in various sectors. I mean, you hear it everywhere nowadays. The Black Lives Matter movement from a few years back. Your oil companies are getting in on the sustainability train. If you're old enough to remember the BP oil spill in, what was it, around 2007, that was a big deal. Of course, renewable energy is now a really common thing to see, but that was not so common 10 years ago. Now it's the fastest, wind and solar are the two fastest growing sources of energy in the United States. Um, Electric cars, again, 5 years ago, you might have heard of Tesla. Now everyone knows what a Tesla is, and it's basically become synonymous with electric vehicles or EVs. Now every single car maker has an EV model. You have things like forest fires that are going on all over the place, especially in the western United States. Although this is happening increasingly in Europe and places like England and France. But those forest fires are all part of sustainability. Can we keep building these neighborhoods and cities and so forth so close to these vulnerable areas? Local food movements you're probably familiar with, including organic foods. The old classic, reduce, reuse, recycle, the three R's. Even green business has become kind of a bigger thing. So it's everywhere. I'm sure you could name a bunch of different places where you could find it. So let's go over what sustainability means. So we hear it everywhere, and it's kind of hard to cut through the clutter, cut through the so-called sustainababble, as some folks have called it. You just hear it everywhere, so it's like, well, what does it really mean? If I can apply it to fashion, cars, and energy, and food, and houses, and everything else, like it kind of loses a little bit of meaning. So let's really think about what it means to be sustainable. And I posted a video on this, and I think Dr. Weiser does a great job of going over some of the key concepts. So let's start with sustainability at a very fundamental level means the capacity to endure, continue, or to maintain itself. I mean, that's a really good starting point. And if you're trying to be sustainable or do something that is sustainable, you have to ask your question, can I keep doing this thing, whatever it is, for the foreseeable future? Can I keep doing it indefinitely? And that is the very first question we need to ask in terms of sustainability. If it can't last based on whatever reason, the resources are going to run out, or the money's going to run out, or whatever's going to, it's going to cause so much chaos socially or economically that we can't do it, well, then it's not sustainable. Okay, so that's a really good starting point. But I want you to just to be clear, sustainable and something that can last a long time doesn't mean it's static or nothing's happening. So let's look at a forest as an example. These are really good example of sustainable systems that are very dynamic and have changed, but yet have lasted and continued to endure over tens of thousands, if not millions of years in some cases. So in southern Delaware, there's Trap Pond State Park. That's one example of a really old, relatively old growth forest anyway. There's trees there that are over 500 years old, right? And the forest itself is actually older than that. The Amazon rainforest, I'm sure you're all familiar with that, down in South America, that's around 10 million years old, right? So this Amazon and Trap Pond State Park, I mean, they have lasted for hundreds, if not millions of years, right? So they're sustainable, as long as humans don't keep cutting things down. But the bigger point here is that just because they're sustainable and they're able to last doesn't mean they're not dynamic, doesn't mean there's not a lot going on or they're not being productive. So if you just try to think about all of the different aspects of the ecosystem of any forest. And if you ever learned anything about it, and even if you haven't, I think you can sort of think of a whole bunch of things that are happening in a forest. Just walk into your local, any tree stand of trees, and see what's happening. Just sit there and observe, and you'll see all kinds of stuff going on if you're really looking. There's bugs, there's small creatures. Of course, the plants are always growing and they're dying, right? So these trees will grow, and then the the branches and leaves will fall off of the trees, and that'll reintegrate back into the soil, and then the microorganisms eat all of the organic material, and the bugs eat the microorganisms, and then the birds eat the bugs, and the foxes eat the birds, and so on and so on and so on, right? So it's constantly changing, constantly changing. It's very productive. I mean, think about this. It's really amazing when you think about how productive forests are, and trees in particular. And all the while, guess what else that's happening here? They're soaking up carbon dioxide, they're providing oxygen, they're providing soil, they're providing food, they're providing fiber, they're providing wood to build our houses and buildings and other things with, right? So it's just constantly being productive and dynamic. And everything in a forest system, so a natural forest ecosystem, everything gets recycled back into the system. There is no actual waste in nature. Nature reuses everything, including things like rocks. Like you see these rocks, you're like, how could you possibly reuse it? Well, that actually turns into soil eventually. And then the nutrients end up in plants, and then the nutrients end up in our bodies and so forth. So all of this, it's very, very productive, and it can sustain itself for millions and millions of years, right? And so, I think it's useful to consider what would happen if we could make our human systems mimic these natural systems, right? Like, get rid of the concept of waste. We should reuse all of our what we call waste now, or trash. Everything should be powered by renewable energy, which is all solar energy. Okay, we can do things like have a circular economy, a steady state economy, cradle to cradle. These are all concepts that are kind of become increasingly recognized in a whole bunch of different sectors of society. If you're not familiar with circular economy, look it up. It's really an incredible concept that is being integrated into a lot of different things. Steady state economy is another one. Cradle to cradle is a certification. Permaculture is a way of designing human systems to be more sustainable and more like nature. And the point here is that, with sustainability, if you want to have a sustainable society, a sustainable system, a sustainable building, whatever, fill in the blank, it doesn't mean that you have to just stop doing things. I mean, sustainable systems can be very dynamic as long as you design them the correct way, so they're reintegrating all of the waste back into the system and reusing all of the resources. All of that has to be driven by renewable energy. Okay, so let's look at an example of this. So everything around you, take a look around you, everything around you is made from something that came from the earth, right? Like I'm looking at a wooden desk here. That's made from trees. There's wood framing in the house that I'm in. That's from trees. The plastic in my computer, that's from oil or natural gas. Everything around you is made from natural resources on the earth. So if we want to establish a sustainable society, we cannot use resources faster than they can be replenished. So truly sustainable resource use requires us to use renewable resources and use them at a rate at which they can be replenished. Okay? So let's look at a quick example. So let's say this could represent, 1 million acres of trees or whatever, but let's just keep it real simple. We have 4 trees. We need to do something with, we need to build something. So let's harvest our trees, right, to make, whatever we need to make with the wood. So we start with 4, we harvest 3, we leave 1, okay, and then we plant 2 more. So what happens? We left 1, we planted 2 more. So now we're left with 3 trees. Well, if I need to continually use 3 trees at a time, okay, if I need to use 3 trees at a time, well, now I harvest 3 trees, I'm planting 2, and then I'm left with 2 trees, right? So what is the result of this? The result here is that it's unsustainable because there's just not enough resources. I'm using them at a rate faster than they are replenished. Okay, so imagine you can apply this for any resource, from even soil, food, fish in the ocean, whatever. Okay, they have a natural replenishment rate, and if we harvest too quickly, then it's not going to last. So let's look at sustainable resource use. This is better. So now we'll harvest only 2 trees because we know that they only grow back. We can only grow back 2 trees at a time. So let's harvest 2. Now we leave 2. We grow 2, and we're left with 4. Now we can harvest 2, grow 2 more, and so on, right? So the result here is that we can keep doing this, indefinitely, all right? So as long as the earth can continue to grow these 2 trees every year, we're in good shape, okay? So we can sustain ourselves. So that's sustainable. Let's look at regenerative. Now, regenerative is kind of like the next wave of sustainability, and it goes beyond sustainable. So let's, instead of just replenishing at an equal rate, let's replenish at a faster rate than we're harvesting. So let's harvest 2 trees, right? And instead of replanting the 2 trees, let's plant 3 trees, right? Now we have 5 trees. We have more trees. And then we harvest 3 trees. Let's pass some sort of policy that requires people to plant more than they harvest. Now we can plant 4 trees, right? Then we're left with more trees, and then we can add more and more. So what happens with this, when we're regenerative, when we're addressing things regeneratively, it's not only sustainable, it's actually more, because we're actually adding more of what we need. And so there are more than enough resources, and not only there are enough, but it will help us sustain future generation, and it'll help us sustain even some population growth. Okay, so if we can do things like this and regenerate and make things actually better than they were before, that is truly sustainable. And in terms of sustainability definitions, there is no one universally accepted definition. The closest we get to that is this Brundtland Commission definition, which is meeting the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. Okay, so this is from the Brundtland Commission in 1987. You may think it's some obscure thing that I pulled from the internet, but this is actually like a huge, very important book that was written in 1987. It was the first attempt at globally to get together and sort of address what they were calling sustainable development at the time. So this, if there is one most widely accepted definition, it is this definition. So if I mention Brundtland Commission, I'm referring to this, something I expect you to at least know. So the Brundtland Commission is meeting the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. So you can see that is, applies what we had just talked about. Like, can we continue to do what we're doing for the foreseeable future? And this concept of considering the impact on future generations is usually called intergenerational equity. So equity is sort of like treating everybody fairly, giving everybody a fair shot, which we'll go over in a minute. Intergenerational means, between generations, all right? And so this concept of intergenerational equity is really important. The last thing I want to go over is the so-called 3E framework. This is a good way to think about sustainability. So remember, the first thing you want to think about, can we keep doing what we're doing? The second way to sort of, at least that I'll talk about addressing sustainability, is to see how what you're doing impacts these 3 things. So first, environment. How does it impact the environment? I think we all know what that means, clean air and water and biodiversity and all that. How does it impact the economy? So not just like, does it affect your bottom line, or can you keep, is it economically profitable? But you want to think about the type of economy that it's promoting. Are they good jobs, good high-paying jobs with high quality of life, or are you kind of using low-wage labor where people can't really survive? So you want to, whatever you're doing, you want it to promote a really good economy for people, for the most people possible. And finally, equity, or social equity, which is the last E, and that is what you are doing promoting fairness to all people, regardless of who they are, where they came from, their social or socioeconomic status, and so forth. Is it promoting good jobs? Is it promoting clean air for everyone? Are you building a factory that's dumping pollution into some low-income area, or an area where communities of color are common, right? So in all things that you do, in order for it to be sustainable, it kind of has to exist at the intersection of these 3 things. Is it promoting environmental sustainability? Is it promoting a good economy, a sustainable economy, one that provides really good paying jobs and promotes a high quality of life for people? And is it equitable? Is it having the same impact on everybody regardless of their social status currently? But also part of equity is that intergenerational equity, where is it being fair to future generations, okay? And so when all of these are incorporated into something, anything, can it be considered sustainable? From a business perspective, they tend to call this the triple bottom line, which is usually referred to as people, planet, and profit. So people would be environment, people would be equity, planet would be environment, and profit would be economy. Okay, so those are our 3 E's. And so just kind of a final thought, and this is all based on the video that I posted. Just remember, we get everything we need to survive physically from the earth. Everything, okay? Provides everything. We only have one Earth, okay? So those resources are limited. And our future collectively will depend on the successful management and use of those resources. We need the resources to survive, and if we want a sustainable future for future generations, we need to sustain these resources. And so sustainability is really about how we can preserve the earth and ensure the continued survival and nourishment of future generations. So, I also want to stress that it's not only future generations we need to worry about, but if you see what's happening in the world, if you pay attention to the news with all of the flooding and the fires and the refugee crisis and all that sort of stuff, that's largely due to climate change, but also social equity and social justice being a big part of it. I mean, really, we're sort of cutting off the branch that we're sitting on, right? So, the analogy here is when we overuse our resources and undermine the Earth's ability to support life, we're undermining the very thing that supports our life currently. So it's really, I think, a good way to think about it. Okay, so hopefully you have a decent idea what sustainability means, how we can define it, and also those couple different ways that we can use resources sustainably, and finally how the 3 E's of sustainability can help us think about whether or not something is sustainable.